Hello, so I'm Lizzie Penny.
And I'm Alex Hirst, and we are the co-authors of Workstyle, a revolution for wellbeing, productivity, and society. But more than that, we're the creators of the word workstyle, which gives everybody the freedom to choose when and where they work for themselves. It's a word that we desperately need now that a huge amount of the work that people do can be done anywhere and any time. And we believe that everybody should be able to fit their work around their life. Everybody has different life circumstances, life changes, and work should fit around that. And work style is the word that we created to make that possible.
So we're going to start by geeking out a bit about the history of work. We say in the book that we are unashamed geeks, and we have geek boxes in the book which have academics who've contributed their deep specialism in a particular area. But to start with a bit of history, the 9-to-5 working day was first conceived of more than 200 years ago by the great social reformer Sir Robert Owen. And at the time, it was a huge leap forward. He campaigned for 8 hours labour, 8 hours recreation, and 8 hours rest. But we think he would be turning in his grave to know that we're still working largely in that way now. Lots of people talk about flexible working, hybrid working, or the 4-day work week as being really progressive in work. But we disagree with that. We actually think that in some ways, those elements of work or those descriptors of work or new structures are actually holding us back, because what they're doing is they're just tweaking work at the edges rather than fundamentally changing the way that we can all work. So there are 3 reasons that we think those aren't the right way to work. So the first is that flexible working is flexing around an outdated system. All of them require this 9-to-5, 5-day-a-week structure to exist, and it's really just tweaking it at the edge. The second thing is it creates what we call in-group, out-group dynamics. So for the people who work full-time, traditional structure, they're in the office, they are the prevailing way of working. And everyone who doesn't work like that is a bit special or different in some way. When I had my first son, I was working 3 days a week, and I felt like I missed all the good stuff in the office. And that doesn't always mean the work stuff. I missed the Eurovision sweepstake or the final of the table football competition. But there were elements that I felt like I was missing out on because I felt like I was in this different group of part-timers. And then the third thing, which we'll come on to talk about in more detail, is that for some excluded groups, flexible, hybrid, the 4-day work week simply isn't creating any change. There are groups who are structurally excluded from work unless we fundamentally change and move to work style working. And carers is one of those groups. And that's why we're so excited to be talking to you today. And we'll come back to talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, it's pretty staggering to think since that 8-hour working day, that concept began, we've, as a species, we've invented electricity. We've traded horses for cars. We've landed on the surface of the moon. We've made staplers and then made staplers. We've invented penicillin, personal computers, mobile phones, even underwired bras. The amount of human progress in that time has been staggering. But when you set that against how little progress has been made in the way we work, it's really quite embarrassing to think that all we've been able to think of, our collective imagination has only been able to conceive of tweaking that basic 9-to-5, Monday to Friday structure. And even the more progressive ways of working that Lizzie talked about, hybrid, flexible, remote, they are all based on maintaining organizational control rather than enabling individual choice. And that is what we believe is fundamentally missing from the world of work and what we hope to change through Workstyle.
So we should say at this point that for us, this is more than about the theory. This is profoundly personal for Alex and I. And in the book, we draw on Workstyle stories. So the stories of people for whom being able to work differently has been transformational for their lives. And it's fair to say that it has been for both of us as well. And so we're just going to share our stories with you now. And we wanted to give you a heads up that we're going to talk about burnout, pregnancy complications, and cancer, in case any of those are triggering for anyone.
Shall I start?
Yeah, you go.
So Workstyle is a word that we came up with in the pub, like all good ideas that seem to be created in the UK. And I'll take you back to that conversation in the pub. And I guess even before we had that conversation, I had reached burnout, and I realized that I needed to make some pretty major changes to my life. Prior to that, I was someone who would get up at 5:30, leave the house at 6:30 to get to the office at 7:30, and then I would get home 12 hours later, in just enough time left in the day then to have something to eat, go to bed and do it all again. And I would do that every day. I kept it up for years, until my wife told me that I'd become a shadow of my former self. I'd become emotionally numb to the highs of work, ambivalent to the lows, and really I distant from the day-to-day. So we did what most people would do in that situation, I think, and take some time off. We went on holiday to Spain for a week, for a friend's wedding, in fact. But I can't really tell you much about that holiday because I wasn't present enough to be forming any memory of it. And it was only when we got back that I realized that had been the case, that actually time wasn't going to help me fix this particular problem. This particular challenge was a mental health challenge that would need a new way of thinking about work and a new relationship with work psychologically. So the big realization that came off the back of that was that I'd been valuing myself and my contribution at work based on how many hours I was putting in, based on the fact that I couldn't physically give any more than those hours I was putting in. And actually what I needed to do was value my work more on the output, on what I actually did, what I achieved, on the outcome of that, the impact of it. So that was the thing that I took to the conversation in the pub that night with Lizzie, where we had a meeting of minds over a few dark and stormy cocktails.
I do love a dark and stormy cocktail. So for me, it was very different. For me, it was when I had my first child, my son Finn, that my eyes were really opened to enduring inequalities at work. And I'm embarrassed to say that until then, I'd been relatively ignorant of those people that were excluded from work. But suddenly, I didn't want to be at work during Finn's every waking hour. I wanted to be working during nap times or in the evenings because I wasn't going out anymore after all. It just didn't seem to make sense to be at work when he was awake and being fun. And so for me, it was about the same thing as Alex, wanting to be judged on my output rather than being in a particular place at a time when traditional work said I should be there. And that was the thing that led me to that meeting of minds in the pub with Alex.
Where we came up with the word Workstyle. And really the word was to give us a language to talk about our own preference of when and where we work, and then enable us to be judged more on our output, not our input. So that was in 2014, and we started a business, Hoxby, to prove it. And since then, my wife Sarah and I have had 2 kids and moved to the countryside. We've fulfilled a life ambition to raise them in the peaceful Wiltshire surroundings of Bishopston. And I'm pleased to say that my mental health has never been better. It improved actually almost immediately, but has got continuously better. And the physical health side effects that I was experiencing as a result of that burnout have also gone and not come back, which is great. I've been able to partake in my kids' education, their activities. I've watched their first steps, heard their first words, which was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a present dad in a way that my dad wasn't really able to be. And now I fit my work style around their needs, whether that's a taxi driver or whatever I'm needed to do for my kids, I'm there for. So I work while they're at school, mostly 9 till 3, Monday to Friday, and sometimes in the evening when they've gone to bed as well. So that's my work style, and it fits around the needs of my kids and my life. And it's been transformative for my well-being and the quality of my work too.
So for me, 2 years after the conversation in the pub, I had some serious complications in my second pregnancy, which meant that I had to have surgery at 23 weeks and then be on bed rest for 9 weeks. And during those 9 weeks, being able to work from bed and only having a few people who knew about my personal circumstances and being judged on my output was amazing. I was able to be distracted, to escape into a digital world, to take my mind off the kind of pervasive anxiety that basically I was living with every day. You know, my son was at nursery, my husband was at work. All I had to think about was the anxiety of whether my twin daughters were going to survive. And I'm very thankful to be able to say that against the odds, both Zoe and Megan did survive quite remarkably. And the day that we brought them home from intensive care and couldn't get the pram through the front door, we couldn't even begin to get the double pram through the front door of our London flat, we decided it was time to move across the country to Bristol, which I was able to do with no disruption whatsoever to my career because of Workstyle working. Fast forward 2 years, and out of the blue, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which turned my world upside down. As a seemingly healthy 38-year-old, it just transformed my life in many ways. But again, Workstyle was my outlet, escaping into my digital working world as much or as little as I felt up to that particular day or week. And it helped to pass the time in the chemotherapy chair. It helped for the cancer diagnosis not to define me. It helped for cancer thoughts not to fill my head all the time. It just gave me somewhere else to go in my head, which was amazing. And since then, almost unbelievably, my husband has been diagnosed with cancer. So now I fit my work around supporting him through his treatment, staying healthy myself and managing the side effects of my medication, and looking after 3 small children. So as you can imagine, it's rare that any 2 weeks are the same for me. And I'm very grateful that my work style means that I can fit work around whatever I have going on in my life at that particular time.
We often talk about how life changes and every life is different, but we obviously couldn't have foreseen that any of that would happen. And it was a far cry from the fun conversation we were having in the pub, where we started making up hand gestures to tell the story of Workstyle, like this. This is Workstyle. You can do it yourself if you feel so inclined. It's very easy, thumbs together. And that's the first. The second, we'll share with you now, the triangle of opportunity, which looks like this.
It's not
very simple,
is it?
As well. Yeah, you just bring those fingers in like that.
Three things were changing in 2014, and this is where the triangle of opportunity comes from. There were 3 things that were really changing when we had that conversation in the pub in 2014 that meant that the conditions were right for Workstyle. In the 8 years since then, Alex and I have said time and again, why didn't we do this before? But the truth is, even if we'd wanted to, those conditions wouldn't have been there. So the first was technology. Now, obviously, technology has become much more portable. Wi-Fi has become much more prevalent. But the thing that really changed in 2014 was that for the first time, you could tether to your mobile phone as a personal hotspot. And what that meant was that you could start working from anywhere. And actually, work stopped being a place that we went and started being a thing that we did, wherever we could find space for our laptops. And we realized that online collaboration and accessible communication meant that we could choose for the first time to work in a way that suited us as individuals. So one size no longer had to fit all. The second big thing that changed was rising awareness of demographic changes, and specifically an aging population. So 21% of the worldwide population will be over 60 by the year 2050. So that's a massive change in our population demographic. And as our life expectancy increases and where a nation state can't provide the pensions and social care it needs, so people will simply have to continue working for longer. And that requires a fundamental reshape of work. And that's not only for individuals to be able to keep working. Without it, organisations just won't be able to recruit the people that they need either. We have UK labour market shortages at the moment. And in fact, Alex and I are talking to the government at the moment about how they can bring more people into work who aren't working currently. And we believe Workstyle is a key part of the answer to that question. So then the third thing that was changing in 2014 was attitudes to work, and more specifically, independence to choose how we each earn a living, with lots of people starting to trade the idea of this job for life for a portfolio career or self-employment. And there are around 4 million self-employed people in the UK. It's actually a huge part of the UK labour force. And the freelance workforce is the fastest growing labour market in Europe. So it's a really big part of the working group in the UK, but rarely one that's viewed as a group together. And that changing environment has also brought with it a newfound independence, but also more responsibility for self-management. So it's really those three things coming together that created the conditions for Workstyle.
Yeah, and so set against the context of those three things and an idea for Workstyle where everybody can choose their own work style and define for themselves when and where they work, we thought we had an exciting concept. But as my product design lecturer would always say, a concept is nothing without a working prototype. So we set about creating one. We started Hoxby in 2015 as a social enterprise, and it's now a B Corp. That's made up of around 500 freelancers globally. We use freelancers to give them, to make sure that they have the autonomy to decide when and where they work for themselves in such a way that traditional employment doesn't allow. So they are a community, therefore, of diverse people from all around the world who we bring together into teams to deliver projects for companies like Unilever, Amazon, AIA, Merck, B-Lab, Divine. And most of the work that they've done over the last 8 years has been in creative problem solving, marketing, communications, solving problems and communicating them. But obviously in the act of doing that in a work style way, they've learned, and we've learned huge amounts about what it means to work with autonomy. So we now share those learnings through the consultancy side of Hoxby to help other organizations and people to adopt autonomous working for themselves. So Hoxby is this experimental playground, if you like, for work style. The more we learn through the act of problem solving, the more we're able to understand what it means to work with autonomy and help people and businesses to do it for themselves as well. So we'll come on to tell you a little bit more about what we've learned over the last 8 years of doing it. Can't hear you.
On mute because of my cough. I'm back. I guess there were three things that we learned really quickly when we were started working in a Workstyle way. And so we were literally bringing together people who could work when and where they choose and would be judged on their output. So the first lesson was to be digital first, not physical first. And for many of those of us who've worked in more traditional working structures, that was a complete mindset shift. At Hoxby, Slack is our office, which is a messaging tool. Google Meet is our meeting room. You would think I would know better than to be on mute when I'm talking, given it's the way I meet people every day. And we have a water cooler. It's a virtual channel in Slack, and it's still full of cats and dogs and babies and funny things, but it's a digital channel that people can go to at a time that suits them to engage in that way. The second thing was to work asynchronously, by which we mean working when it suits us as individuals rather than needing to work at the same time as everyone else. And that is actually a highly collaborative way to work, but it's also really productive and can also be really fun. But you do have to set the right parameters and have the right combination of technology to mean that people can each make their own individual contributions at a time that it suits them, rather than having to be on calls or work together at the same time. And the third thing is investing in a trust-based culture. Work-style working just doesn't work if you don't have a trust-based culture to underpin it. And, you know, I would say I'm a prime example of that. Like, I am as dedicated to my work as anyone is. Don't judge me on whether I'm working from bed or working from chemo chair or working from hairdresser, because my hair's growing back and now sometimes I work from the hairdresser. Judge me on my output. I am dedicated to my career, even when I'm working in those different places. But that trust needs to be role modeled by leaders. It needs to be recognized, and it needs to be rewarded in organizations that want to work in a work-style way.
Those are three pretty big changes from traditional work that was, I guess, constructed in an industrial time. So if a company is digital first, not physical first, is asynchronous, not synchronous, trust-based, not presence-based, then that creates the conditions for autonomy to work at scale, for people to be able to collaborate in a work-style way. But what does that mean for people? Well, if you give people autonomy to decide when and where they work, then they have to accept that there is a greater accountability for what they deliver that goes with that. Autonomy and accountability go hand in glove. You can't have autonomy without this sense of accountability. But if you can understand that accountability for what you deliver over and not how many hours you put in, then you can yield the multiple benefits of autonomy. So even before we started working this way, we knew that autonomy was better for people's work-life balance, for job satisfaction, for engagement, and for productivity. There's lots of desk research to support that. We also knew that it reduced stress and staff turnover and exhaustion. So again, we already knew huge amounts about the possible benefits of autonomy, and there's endless research to back that up. We cover loads of it in the book, but the book is also fun as well as being heavily referenced. So there's loads of benefits to autonomy, but we wanted to understand a little bit more about it, and what it means ourselves. So we started in 2019 our own longitudinal research study. So longitudinal meaning that it happens every year, the same study, and we can track the changes or differences over time, which helps us to see patterns, but also understand the impact of any changes or interventions we make along the way. And what we discovered was that well-being explains the link between autonomy and productivity. So we specifically looked at, why does having autonomy make you more productive? And what we found was the answer is that you have an increased state of well-being. So it is through well-being that autonomy affects productivity. So it's better for us. Let there be no doubt. The future of work is autonomy. And that's what we believe in, and it's what we're trying to create.
So in terms of well-being, and we won't go through this in loads of detail because we go into lots of detail in the book, but essentially there are 5 ways that Workstyle improves well-being. It's better for our mental health. Alex has already talked about his story in that area. It allows us to work with purpose. It means we're free to learn in our own way. It facilitates connections, and it helps us to look after our bodies. And each of those are underpinned by real world stories and lots of research.
Yeah, and from a productivity perspective, Workstyle is also revolutionary in 5 ways. I was just going to see if I could find the hand gesture, but I can't skip to it quickly now. Oh, here it is. Here it is. There it is, fresh out of the book.
Fresh out.
It means we can maximize our personal energy, have clarity by working the right way for us, practice to master areas we want to, trust and feel trusted, and set up our own environment to be optimally productive for each of us as individuals. For example, did you know that just being able to tailor your desk space, if you have a desk job, can increase your productivity by up to 32%? Quite a lot. Yeah.
This plant was a great investment. So just finally, lastly, the thing that we just want to talk about is the thing that makes Alex and I so excited about Workstyle. It's the spine-tingling excitement. It's the reason that we jump out of bed every morning. And that is the impact that Workstyle can have on society as a whole. And that's about inclusion, attitudes, and intelligence, our collective intelligence. From an inclusion perspective, in the book, we talk about 7 groups who are structurally excluded from work. Older workers, carers, we'll come back to that one, people who have a chronic illness, people with a physical disability, a mental health challenge, parents, and those who are neurodiverse. For various reasons, those groups are structurally excluded if work has to be conducted in an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. We have found that almost everyone we talk to is in at least one of those groups. As you know from my story, I'm in quite a few of those groups, actually. But I still have a meaningful contribution to make to work. And actually, what we've found is that for anyone in those groups, they understand the challenges presented by the traditional working system, and particularly the compromises that need to be made in order to survive and thrive in that working world. And for each of those groups in the book, we look at what we call the gap stats. So the gap between those people who want to work and those who actually do in each group. So, for example, 77% of people with autism want to work, but only 26% do. So that's a 51% gap. Similarly, 39% of people who are retiring do so voluntarily. The other 61% want to keep working in some capacity. It's just so shocking that these people aren't able to work. And for carers, 61% of carers don't do paid work, don't do other paid work, and yet 50% of them would like a job. So that's a 30.5% gap. So for each of those groups, there is a gap, some of them chasmic, between the people who want to work in that group and the people who can. So that just serves to illustrate the transformative effect that this could have on both people's lives and on society if we could work in a way that structurally included all these people who are currently excluded. In terms of attitudes, I think the thing about attitudes is that though we all have lots in common, ultimately we're all unique individuals. And Workstyle isn't just a structure of work, it's an attitude to work. It's about viewing everyone as an individual and recognizing that what they've got going on in their life comes first and work needs to fit around that. And that means focusing on the individual contribution of each person, regardless of the other characteristics that might traditionally create bias at work. Alex, do you want to take intelligence?
Oh, I'd love to. I would love to. So if you can create lower the barriers to inclusion in the way that Lizzie's described, we can create more diverse groups of people working together. And if we can create these conditions where those diverse people recognize the individual contribution that each person is making, then we create conditions for them to integrate well. And Sir Jeff Mulgan describes diversity and integration as the formula for collective intelligence. And collective intelligence can be thought of as how smart we are as a group. So a lot of organizations struggle with groupthink, largely because they have groups of people who look, think, talk, and act the same, and who perhaps live within a commutable distance. So there is a fairly narrow opportunity for diversity and for collective intelligence in traditional work. And given that much of the work we do now is with our brains rather than our bodies, generalizing, of course, but we are a knowledge economy rather than a manufacturing economy in the main. That is a limiting factor. Groupthink and not having cognitively diverse groups is a limiting factor to companies and their ability to progress, but also to us as a species and our ability to solve the more challenging problems of our time. The 8-hour day is more than 200 years old. It was created in an industrial age. Is it possible that that basis of human collaboration is now the thing that's holding us back in the digital age that we live in and have lived in for some time? In summary, I think we need to recognize that the pandemic has hugely impacted society. It's opened people's eyes to the potential to work in a different way and to access work that perhaps they couldn't before. It is an opportunity for positive change. And in the future, historians are going to look back on this time and see it as an inflection point. The pandemic created an opportunity for change. And what we need to make sure is that as a society, as a collective of human beings, we take that opportunity to bring about much needed change, bring about a revolution to the way we think about work, the basic operating system of work, and change it from an industrial age system to a digital age system, a system that enables autonomy, that includes more people and increases our collective intelligence. We believe this is our opportunity. The time is now for this change to happen. So we're here today to talk to you, to invite you as people for whom this is incredibly relevant, to join our revolution and help us change the future of work and the future of society forever.